I want to put a slide up on the screens now, if we've got that up there now. Who can tell me what that is in the sky? Rainbow. Yep. And that's so picturesque, isn't it? That little scene. I want to show you another rainbow that's a little bit different. Right? It's still a photo of rainbow, but just a little different, not as quite picturesque. Who can tell me how many colours are there in the rainbow? How many can we see? 7. Oh, you smart people. Who can tell me why we see those colours? What happens? How are those colours formed? Refraction. That's a big word this morning, Joel. So I'll go a little picture of what actually happens. So white light comes in and it sort of moves through droplets of rain and splits up, and we see 7 colours, don't we? Now, the human eye has 3 detecting cone cells in the human eye. Most mammals only have 2, but we have 3. And each one of those sees about 1,000 different shades of colour. But combined, we can see 1,000,000 different shades of colour with the human eye. So how many colours are there in a rainbow? 7. But there's a whole lot more. We just can't see the separations between them. But the human eye has this incredible capacity to see up to 1,000,000 different colours. Now, I've said all that to ask you just one question this morning. What colour is your grey roof? No, it's not a trick question, Joel. So what colour is your grey roof? Our daughter Bronnie and her husband Sean have built a new house in Shannon Waters. And it's on their land with their money, and they're responsible for it completely. But they had to build by law a wooden fence. It had to be made out of brick. It had to be a certain distance back from the footpath, and you can't have a front fence. So even when you have a 3 or 4-year-old and you want to protect them from getting run over, you cannot put up a fence on your own land because of the rules that exist. Why are those rules there? I drove down that street this morning and every single house, the roof is grey. Why? Because it could be white. That would be more beneficial, bouncing off Australian Aussie sun. It's because there's a desire to have every house and property looking the same. And it's not just a pressure to do it, it's actually legislated in it. It's not that a ColourBond fence wouldn't work. In fact, it would last longer than a wooden one. Brick is not the only thing you can make houses from, but in Shannon Waters, you're forced on your own land to look like everyone else. So what colour is your grey roof? What colour is your grey car? Do you know, if you combine the colours of grey for cars and also include, say, black cars and silver cars, that accounts for approximately 70% of the cars on our roads, even though white is 12% safer. Why? Why, when the human eye can see 1,000,000 different colours, don't we have cars that look like the next one? Right? You could drive. Philip, you could drive a car like that, it'd match your shirt, right? It would be fun to drive a car, but see, some of you, when you see that, you think, I would be too embarrassed to drive a car like that. Because we all want to look the same and not stand out from other people. And that's not new. See, 3,000 years ago, the nation of Israel rejected God's way of doing society. And they went to the prophet Samuel and they said, we want a king, we want a government. Not so they could have better roads and better internet service and all the things that Israel wanted back then. They said, this is why we want a government. So we will be the same as every other nation. And even though Samuel told them, this is what a government will do. It will tax you. It will make laws you don't like. It will impose on your rights. It will take away your freedoms. No, we just want to be like everyone else. And history tells us that that didn't actually go so well for Israel. Now, I can actually empathise with Israel because growing up, we didn't have much money. And going to school, I wanted to look just like everyone else. But my mum, to save money, knitted me a school jumper. Do you know what knitted school jumpers look like compared to the proper professional ones? Do you know what that feels like? And my plastic shoes when other people had leather shoes. And my pants, my grey pants were the cheapest you could get. They weren't those nice ones that had a crease in them and stuff. I understand that desire to sort of, like, I never, until I left home, ever had a professional haircut. I used to have long flowing curly hair everywhere on my head. Now it's everywhere else. But my mum cut my hair and she was terrible. And everyone at school had really nice haircuts like Jessie and Zeke. And I looked different because Mum, and when she cut it, because it was so traumatic because there'd be so many tears, she would cut it really short, my fringe really short, so she didn't have to do it for a while, right? We had a lot of trauma over haircuts. But as humans, we struggle with acceptance ever since we got kicked out of the garden, and we want to just fit in. We want to be like everyone else. Now, in 2023, we live in I think probably one of the most unique periods in the time of world history, especially in the Western world, is because there's this incredible pressure to conform to everyone else. It's an overwhelming pressure, and it's global. It's national. It's not just in Shannon Waters where the regulations force you to build and look like everyone else. It's everywhere, and it's unspoken, and it's very obvious on Facebook if you want to say things that are contrary to the new morality of life. You'll get shut down because you're daring to be different. There's this overwhelming pressure. And studies have showed that kids, that for every hour they spend on social media, they become more and more depressed. Why? It's not just comparing body images and all that sort of stuff. It's the pressure to be like everyone else, to conform. And our world's response to COVID, our own government's response to COVID, took us to places that 10 years ago, if you had talked about what was going to happen and we lived through it, you would have thought it was a joke, a bad joke. This could never happen in an Aussie culture. This would never happen. And there's more, like, for me as an Australian Christian Church's pastor, there are things that I cannot say and cannot do, not because it violates God's law, or natural law, but by new human laws. And so it's because I can't do certain things or say certain. I'm sort of pressured to conform to someone else's worldview that's different to how humans have seen life for a long, long time, how God sees life. And our planet, everything you see around us would not exist except for heaven. And God's plan from the beginning was to establish on earth the kingdom of heaven, the culture of heaven. And what he has planned will stand. What he's said he will do, it will be done. And when Jesus taught us how to pray, he said, begin with the big picture, begin with God, and pray that his will would be done on earth as it is in heaven. It's the culture of heaven coming to earth. When God creates a purpose, it's set. And purpose does not change. Your eye that can see a million different shades of colours will never ever hear sounds. You can call it an ear. You can call it a listening device. But its purpose will stand. It will only ever see. It will never hear. A surgeon could stitch your eye closed and put some other skin from somewhere and make a thing that looked like an ear. But it will never function as an ear because eyes are designed to see, not hear. And God has a purpose for your life and it will stand. Whether you walk into that, whether you experience it or not, his purpose for your life does not change. And in Psalm 33:11, it says this, but the plans of the Lord stand firm forever, the purposes of his heart through all generations. When my grandfather was young, he responded to that purpose of God upon his life. And the benefit of that isn't just to me, his grandson, but it carries generationally over to my grandkids. His great-grandkids are benefiting from a decision he made to follow Jesus as a teenager. And then in 1929, my grandparents got married, and when they got back from their honeymoon, they started their first church, pastoring a church in a little place called Maldon, a little gold mining town in Victoria here. And back then, if two people were living together and weren't married, the community said that was living in sin. And 100 years ago, there was this pressure to conform to a Christian worldview, to a Christian values, Christian standards, and even if you had no relationship with Jesus, there was a pressure upon you to look like you're a Christian. That world is long since gone. And now you have a reverse of that pressure. And I believe that today, the greatest challenge to the Western church is this tsunami of pressure to conform to a secular worldview that's very different to God's values. And if you want to see a description of that, have a look in 2 Timothy chapter 3, where Paul describes the culture that we're living in. Now, I use the word tsunami because a tsunami, when it crosses the boundaries that God places around an ocean, when it crosses those boundaries, pain and loss and destruction and death and hurt happen to people. And on Thursday night, I had a guy that I've never met, not a Christian, just started pouring out his heart to me on Messenger, the pain that he's been through. His wife walked out on him 5 years ago, and he's a single dad now, and he just poured out his pain. And wherever you look around us, people are hurting. There's trauma, there's loss, there's broken relationships, there's just damaged people with this tsunami of pressure to conform to a different way of life than God planned for us. Now, the bad news is that pressure to conform is going to increase. The good news is that I believe as that pressure increases, that this will be the church's finest hour. And the reason I say that is because that Paul told us in Ephesians 5 that Jesus is coming back for, listen to this, a glorious church without spot or wrinkle or any other blemish. Instead, she will be holy and without fault. Now, I like that picture. But after 2,000 years of doing church, we're not there yet. Even just in recent years, there's a shifting, a sifting of God's church on planet Earth. There's been royal commissions into sexual abuse by institutions, including churches. Horrific stuff has been exposed. We are seeing, even right now, in a sense, the rise and fall of mega churches in the globe. And some very, very high-profile church leaders have been exposed for abuse of power and position and manipulating people and being hypocrites. And our TV runs with these stories. But it's not just the big stuff, not just the big things. Only a few months ago, 60 Minutes did a story on a church in Sale, 45 minutes from us. Like, that's very close to home. Because God is coming back. Jesus is coming back for a church without all that yucky stuff that just pollutes what God intends his church, his bride to be like. But it will take something significant to bring this about, to get that final beauty treatment for his bride. It's going to take something very different than the last 2,000 years. And Jesus told us what that would look like just before he came back. He also told his disciples what they would personally go through, what they would experience in their own life, and then he told them why he was actually telling them some ugly stuff that was going to happen. And this is the reason, and it's the same reason he gives us an insight into where our world is going and what will happen as God gets his bride ready for him. And it's recorded in John 16, the very first verse says, "I've told you these things so that you won't abandon your faith." The King James says, "so you will not be offended." Now, the word that's translated from Greek into English, offended, the word that Jesus used, that John records, it's a weird word. It's a strange little word. I'm gonna try and pronounce it for you. It's scandalizo. Scandalizo. It comes from a word meaning scandalon, which is this word picture of a snare, of a trap that's ready to get you. It's where we get the word scandal from. Now, you've heard the word scandal, and we use it in our culture in probably a wide way, but it didn't begin that way. And in the 12th century, it was literally just to be kept. The word scandal was used if a Christian, through their behaviour, brought a bad report to a church, made God look bad, made a church look bad. It was said it was a scandal. But when Jesus used the word 1,200 years earlier, that's where it leads to, but that's not exactly what Jesus was saying. Jesus was saying something very specific. He said this offence, this trap, this snare that's set for you, this is what it does. And this is what the word means. To begin to distrust and desert the one who you should trust. You should obey. It also means to see in another what you disapprove of, and that then hinders you to acknowledge their role in your life. See, the trap is set, this thing, this offence, it's set when God doesn't stop something happening in your life that you think he should have stopped. This trap is set when God doesn't do what you've asked him to do and you think he should, or when church leaders or other Christians let you down. The trap's set. And when we get offended, there's this trigger stick and we trip it up and we're caught. And Jesus, he wants to protect us from offence. And so what he does is he wants us to have right expectations and not carry wrong expectations of life, of what could happen. And so Jesus does something that very, very few leaders would ever do. He says to us, I promise you, if you follow me, you will have trouble. Imagine a church slogan. We could put it out the front there. Follow Jesus, he'll lead you to trouble. What a great slogan. What a sales pitch for churches to have. Follow Jesus and you're going to have trouble. But that's what Jesus said, because if you don't understand, you actually can expect it different, and when it doesn't happen the way you expect, you get trapped and caught and offended, and then you pull back, and you're the one that's caught, and you're the one that suffers. But that's not the only thing he said when he's talking about that. He put little bookends before it and afterwards, and just before he said, I promise you're going to have troubles, he says, but in me, you'll have peace. Not separate to Jesus, because it's about relationship. It's in me. No matter what's going on, you can have peace. And then when he says, I've told you all this so that you may have peace in me. Here on earth you will have many trials and sorrows, but take heart because I have overcome the world. Dying on a cross didn't look like overcoming, but an event called the resurrection did. And that overcoming changed a very sceptical brother James into a fully signed up follower of Jesus. And it's changed me, that event, that overcoming. And it's changed you. And when he said take heart, he says be encouraged. And the logic, the reason behind it is because if Jesus could overcome whatever came at him, then so can we. Whatever pressures come at us, in him, with his help, in trusting him, going through it with him, we can. That's where the be encouraged bit comes. So how does this work? Because the pressure to change to the culture of our world is just going to get stronger, and it's going to get stronger. See, already there are people here in Australia that believe that fundamental Christianity is dangerous. They believe that. They would see gender fluidity as a normal part of life. That same-sex marriage is a very noble thing. Now, I'm not worried about the issues because God always looks at the heart of people, and I'm not worried about behaviour, what people do. I'm not talking about that. What I'm saying is there's a cultural shift to see the world differently. And so what do we do with that? Because we're created to be salty. We're created to be little bright lights, like this village on a hill that can't be hidden. So how do we get to that place? Well, Paul helps us in Romans 12. In verse 2 he says, do not conform to the pattern of this world. And here's the way. Here's the only way to not do that. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Now, when we hear the word mind, we're thinking knowledge. But knowledge doesn't change people. It's what we do with knowledge. It's how we understand knowledge. And when he used mind, it includes your feelings and your will. See, 2,000 years ago, when Paul was saying how we can be transformed, he included a word that literally means emotional intelligence. That this transformation would include a place where you would understand how you feel and why you're feeling these things. And it's not just about what you think, it's what you feel. And we've said some really dumb things as Christians. We've said things like we walk by faith and not by feelings. Well, the Bible doesn't say that. And 2,000 years ago, Paul is saying your transformation will include understanding your feelings, and it's just not about information. And our mind is part of it's our intellect, but it comprises more than that. It's our perceptions, it's our understanding. It's the capacity to think of divine things and recognise goodness and hating evil. That's what the word mind means, the Greek word. It also refers to our capacity to judge our thoughts, our feelings, our purposes, and our desires. And when we're transformed, when we're changed, it's a renovation process that goes on. And how does that take place? How do you renovate a house? Well, we know how to renovate a house, but how do you renovate a mind? It's really simple. It starts with a relationship with Jesus, involves the Holy Spirit in our life, and then we soak in this thing. Years ago, there was an ad on TV, and Marge has got her hands soaking in Sunlight detergent, and she's getting this manicure, and her friend's telling her something, and she says, "You're soaking in it." Oh, and it's Sunlight detergent. You have to be fairly old. Do you remember that one, Elle? You do. I picked an oldest person I could find, so thank you. I can remember it too, don't you worry, right? But we are transformed. The renovation in our minds, how we understand our emotions, how we perceive God, it comes from soaking in His Word. Imagine, for all those that could read, if we read about the culture of heaven, what the kingdom of heaven looks like, and we soaked in it. It would get into us. Better than Sunlight detergent. I think that's what it was. And when we have this transformation, we're changed, and we can understand spiritual things. We can see our world, and the pressure to conform it drops away. It's just not there. And we shine in a world that's really hurting. And I know there's a lot of Christians that are hurting, and God wants to renovate your life and set you free so that you're not struggling the way you are. Every time you see the word salvation or saved in the New Testament, it literally means, it's the word sozo, it means healing and wholeness, healing and wholeness. Jesus came to bring healing and wholeness now, so we can shine. And it includes and is critically connected to this transformation in our thinking, in our understanding, in our minds. And then Paul says, then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good and pleasing and perfect will. So in finishing, I want to show you what that looks like. See, we began as a church in a house or 2 or 3. We ended up at the Hub, and the Hub looked like a great place to keep building. And then COVID came, and we decided we wouldn't separate people based on their vaccination status. And being a government-controlled building, even though it's the local government owned it, we couldn't meet there. So we were homeless, and we moved and we moved and we moved. And we got to a place where we thought, well, we have to get a building. That's not how the world thinks. Only Christians think in that sort of approach to life. A stamp club that's been going for 2 years isn't thinking of buying a building if they lose the one they have in. But see, you think differently when you're a Jesus follower. And someone found out that this building was for sale, and we had a look at it, and we shared those thoughts with you guys. And you gave $140,000 in 15 days to begin a process of getting this building. That's amazing. I was shocked. The generosity. And so we began down a path where we were using a broker to work with 5 different banks that we could get the funding, the finance, because we could prove on paper that we could pay the repayments. And we were told the banks were all very happy about our financial position, but one by one those banks walked away from us. Do you know why? The banks told us that the reason they're not going to loan to us is because we're a church, and Christians don't always play well together. And when they stop playing well together, they take their money and go. And because you've only just a little baby church, we don't care about your finances now. We don't have any faith in churches to pay back. So no, we're not going to help you. Now, we had put down a deposit on this place based on us being able to get bank finance to buy the place. It's gone. And we're sitting around, well, we've got 140,000, but the place is 526,000. And then one family put their hand up and said, we'll loan you 100,000. And then another family said, we'll do the same. And then another family said, and then we're only 100,000 short. And so our last bank we are dealing with was the Bendigo Bank here in Bairnsdale. And we only wanted 100,000 from them. With the security of the building, we had all this cash, we had the other loans, and they said, nope, we're not loaning it to you. You're too big a risk, you're a church. We don't like churches. If you're a business and you had no track record and you're hoping to sell saucepans on the side of the road, we'll loan you the money because you want to make money. But churches don't want to make money, so we don't know what to do with you. Different worldview, you see. So we're coming from a God worldview. God's in this. But we're 100,000 short. And then a family not part of Redgum, they're part of a different denomination, don't come to here, loaned us the last 100,000. But then we still needed 52,000 cash to pay the GST. And so a family in Redgum said, we'll loan you that for 3 months. See, when you're thinking, when your responses are transformed by the renewing of your mind, you see the world differently, you approach every situation differently, and then what Paul said becomes a reality. You see the perfect will of God through it all. You see the hand of God directing. And you know what? We took possession of this in August of last year. We met in here for the first time in November. Since then, on top of all the things to purchase the building, people have given $70,000 to help fit this thing out. All the work that's been done in here is basically been given for free. All the electrical work, all the building work. Like, sure, the kitchen's half done, right? We don't have the money for that, but we will. We can chuck kids out there that don't annoy us in here. See what happens. See, God's word's living. When you apply it, this is how it works. And in the past, God spoke to me out of Isaiah 49. And he promised me some stuff. And in there, he promised me that if I would put my hand up and lead people, that I would be able to pray for people. And the words that in Isaiah says that to say to the captives, come out, to those that are prisoners, be free. And Pam was going to be here this morning to share a little bit of her story. But a few months ago, she did share how she had struggled all her life with feeling inferior, that she could never compete with other people. She just felt unworthy her whole life. It had carried her. She'd been through failed marriages and all sorts of mess, and her whole life she'd felt inferior. And she came out one Sunday and we prayed for her, and instantly she was set free. And I rang her last night. I said, how are you going with that? Do you want to share this morning? And she says, not only was I set free instantly, she said, it's permanent. It's permanent. You wouldn't pray for her if you conform to the way the world thinks. Because you would say, she's ancient. It's been that way forever. She's going to bump me on the head for that, isn't she? You're going to bump me on the head too. Okay. She's a young 75 or 76, right? I love her heart, I love her spirit, I love her energy, but she has been dogged by this thing. And God set her free. But it's permanent. The world doesn't think like that. You would not think to pray for that unless you're a God follower. And why do we do that? Because when you soak in His word, you discover that that's what He's called us to do. And so, Paul, come out here, mate. A couple of weeks ago, in James chapter 5, probably one of the books of the Bible and chapters of the Bible and verses of the Bible that's my favourite. James deals with sickness, and he says if someone's sick, call the elders of the church and they're fine, right? Now, we know that that doesn't always play out, but that's God's plan. And then he says, at the end of it all, he says, and share your stuff with one another and pray with one another so you would be healed. He's already dealt with physical stuff. This is not physical. Now he's talking about when you share your stuff with one another and pray for one another. And we, Steve Pike and you and I, spent a couple of hours in here, and you can tell us whatever you want to tell us.
Okay. So I was born in Bairnsdale and grew up in Bruthen till halfway through primary school, and lived in the Yarra Valley pretty much the rest of that time. And we moved back, or I moved back, and here started last year in January. You know, the things that led up to that we'd prayed about, and God answered things in a particular way that we knew that was what we'd do, and we've done that in the past too. And it isn't easy, and it isn't always easy. But I remember one particular move we made from Mornington Peninsula to the Yarra Valley back then. That was really difficult. And I had a friend say, you know, but what if you just stayed there? And I said, but we prayed a specific prayer. We put out a fleece, and God answered that. And I said, if I didn't do what we'd prayed about, then I'd be second guessing the rest of my life if I was on the path that God had. So, you know, all I knew when I moved back to East Gippsland is that I wanted to spend 2/3 of the time hunting and fishing, and thought that would probably work out pretty good. You know, it didn't work out like that, but it seemed like a great idea at the time. And so we've been just living, and I didn't know what to do, but knew exactly what I didn't want to do. And I didn't want to step back into what I had been doing the past few years, and that was just working so hard I didn't have anything left to give to anybody else. And including my family, not being able to serve them the way I wanted to. And sometimes, and one of the things Lex said to me is sometimes, though, it's not about having the time, but you've actually got to have energy for the time that you have. I've always worked pretty physically and like to, but due to the ageing process, it's not as easy. I don't like it. Anyway, we just prayed, and the next day I sort of just made a plan of things to do, to approach, to thinking about, you know, employment, etc. And I had a list. There were 3 things I had written down in front of me. And the first 2 didn't appeal, so I just rang my cousin who does work for NDIS. And I didn't make any more phone calls. And like, I know after we'd prayed, I felt like a load had lifted. I know that there were aches and pains that I have in my body. They're still there due to, you know, the punishment I've given it over the years. But they're nowhere near as severe, and still improving. And I've started doing caring, and I can feel like a transformation of my mind, thinking about things, planning things, because I'd stopped planning because I didn't want to fail, because I didn't have the energy to do it. But it's just been freeing. I just think All I can think of is a passage. It just says, "Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things shall be given unto you." And that's what Lex is talking about right now. Not conforming to the world, just going after God, going after what he has for you, because I know that my wife's parents and my parents both obeyed the call on their lives, did what God called them to, and it wasn't easy. They went through a lot of difficulties, and we all still will. But the blessing that stems out of it isn't just for ourselves, but for many that don't know God. So just, if you're struggling, soak in it, soak in his word. It's steroids for the spirit that's living in you. And just pray with others. Pray with your brothers and sisters, and call upon the Spirit of God to reign in your life and those around you.
Just stay there for a sec. Yeah, you can get up, thanks. What I love about what Paul shared is that three of us, God's kids, got together and prayed into his world. There was a very unhappy place, a very unfulfilled place for you. And to see the turnaround has been just so dramatic. It's encouraging. And even when we're praying about all the big ticket items in your life, I just felt to pray for your feet. Remember? Yeah. And I don't normally pray for people's feet, but I just prayed for Paul's feet, that they'd function how they need to. And even the next day you're saying that had been a really big improvement, And it's just, God cares about every aspect to us. And that's why the renewing of our mind is the key to the transformation, because it's how we think, and how we think affects every action we do. So I just love the fact that now they'll pay you to go fishing and hang out with people in the bush and stuff, That's pretty good.
I saw a wild dog yesterday morning.
You saw a wild dog. Yeah. Well done. And you got paid for seeing that?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Good on you. Well done. Thanks.
Cheers.